As you can tell by the way I'm dressed, it's a little bit cool today. Now, I've come to a place called Maryport. It's another beach. After my success with waterfalls, I was going to go and do some more. Just give myself some reassurance it wasn't just a fluke, but also because it's nice to build up a series of photos on the same subject. Now, I have a little confession. I have forgotten the dead cat that sits on top of my microphone, so I'm hoping I'm going to get away with it because I'm going to try and stay in sheltered places. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is having good rounds, and I'm going to set my camera into black and white on the screen so I can see what I'm looking at. I've got a few ideas. There's a groin here, Fridge Lake, for something interesting. I know that the wave will be white, and I will probably do those with a long exposure. There's a lot of texture on the beach because there's a mixture of sand and pebbles. So I'm hoping I can do something interesting with that. Probably something closer up. The pier itself I'm not too interested in. It's got some nice texture and form. And there's some nice hills in the background. You know, I could do a very still big vista shot, but I don't feel I'm quite ready for that yet. I'm still going to focus on my scenes within the scene. Smaller details. I'm going to use my 24 with 240 lens again. I've bought my ND filters, and let's have a walk and see if I can get my first shot. I've set my first shot up by the groins, see what I'm looking at. Now, it's not that long after high tide. High tide was probably about an hour ago, so it has receded a bit. I could really do with a bit more wave action in the middle of the groins to give me some more contrast. I've got a 10-stop ND filter on, and I've done an exposure for around about a minute, I think actually 56 seconds. I'm going to test that, see if it's long enough, or whether I need to really wait for the tide to go out a little bit more. So the last thing I'm doing is a really long exposure, 262 seconds I think, or 200, maybe it was 266, just because I want to completely smooth out the water. It's kind of Michael Kenna-ish. He does a few of these shots where he has just some simple poles stored in the water, I think in one of his Japanese series. And I'm going to play around a little bit of this sort of shoreline, just trying a few different shutter speeds really till I get the sort of feel of what I want. What I'm going to do is go up the other end, so I'm not looking at that here, but looking back at this groin. There's an industrial plant behind it, but as I'll be looking down to the beach, don't think that should be an issue. I've set my camera really low. There's a rock right in the foreground, and that's creating my foreground interest. And I'm just waiting for the patterns of the waves as they come in and swirl around it. I've got quite a slow shutter speed, 1.3 seconds, and I've been playing around with different shutter speeds till I get an effect that I like the look of. One thing I have found is it's better to let a wave come in, go past the rock, and then catch the shot as the wave recedes, because it leaves these stripes of white foam running back up the beach, which makes the shot more interesting. It's just pot luck, really. I'm just shooting a few, seeing what works, and I think at the end of the day I'll have something that I can use. Right, let's head back to the studio and see what we've got. I'm back in my home studio now. Let me just go through the images that I captured. So this is the first one of the groins. This is the raw file, and this is what it looks like when I've converted it to black and white. In all honesty, to me, it feels a little bit cluttered. I think I've got a bit too much of the groin in. It doesn't really lead your eye anywhere. It's still quite a nice image. I'm reasonably happy with it, but I don't think it's one of my best. Let's move on to the second one. I noticed while I was out in the field, it felt a bit cluttered, so I did try taking my second groin shot by just capturing the end of the groin, the bit that was in the sea. This is the raw file. When I've come to process this, I decided I want to make this a bit more minimal by getting rid of the horizon. So I deliberately pulled the sky down and then blended it into the foreground. And this is what it looks like when I've converted it, a much more low-key, minimalist style image. And I felt this worked much better than the previous one. It's not as cluttered. I think there's a good amount of negative space there, and it feels quite minimal. But generally, I'm pretty pleased with this. Let's move on to my third image, which is this one. When I saw this, I thought it would look really nice as a colour image too. I quite like the pastel shades of the sort of browny colour in the foreground and the pale blue of the sky. However, I wanted to convert this to black and white as well, so I went ahead and did that. And I really liked actually having the little channel marker right in the background, because it gives a feeling of scale to the image, a bit like having a person in the landscape. I wasn't quite sure whether it felt a little bit cluttered, having a bit too much of the groin on the left-hand side. Maybe I should have moved much further to the right and captured just the end of the groin, perhaps with a channel marker right in the distance. I did sort of do another crop of that to see what it would look like. It looks something like this. It is pretty similar to the second image I took, so I don't feel it's something that I would keep as a crop from this image, but it was to give me an idea about simplifying my compositions. And I think that's the lesson I learned, is to still spend more time looking at your composition very carefully and deciding, have you got all the right elements in there? Are there things that you should be leaving out? The next image I took was of the rock right on the shoreline with the waves crashing round it. As you can see from the raw file here, it's a much bigger image than the final one I processed, which I'll get to in a second. I didn't really like the groin. There's an industrial plant and all the stuff on the horizon in the background, so I decided to do a much tighter crop, a square crop, with the rock a bit more in the center. There's a slight problem with that, in that maybe the rock would be better placed on the rule of thirds, and that was a bit difficult to do without losing some of the things I wanted in the image. I really wanted this kind of curve of the waves starting in the foreground, circling round the rock and going round to the background. What I did like was taking the image as the waves are receding. I think that's created some interesting patterns and texture right on the shoreline there. I feel reasonably pleased with this image, although there is one thing that really bothered me, and I'll show you the previous crop I did. So the shoreline is obviously sloping down quite steeply, and when I looked at the image originally, I did a crop where I kept the horizon perfectly level, and it looks like this, and it just feels odd. It feels like the image is sloping, and it makes you feel a bit uncomfortable. Although diagonals are often good in an image, I really don't think they worked well here. So what I did was then tilted the image to keep it reasonably flat. I evened out the slope and made it look like it was not sloping down to the waterline at all. And I think actually that just makes the image look a lot better. I'll just share a few thoughts with you of what I learned in this next stage of the process. I'm pleased to say that I'm still really enjoying this. I'm still getting a lot of pleasure out taking photographs. And I came across a quote by Bertold Auerbach recently. And he said this about music, but I feel I could equally apply it to photography. Photography is washing away the dust of everyday life from my soul. And that's how I feel when I get out in the field taking photographs. And I hope it's doing something similar for you. I've been persevering with Guy Tarl's book, Be Extraordinary. I have to say, you kind of need a glass of wine to read this book. It's quite heavy going. There's a lot of references to philosophers like Nietzsche and Thoreau. But one of the things that struck me most recently was, if you're going to be extraordinary, then I want my photography to be a piece of art that when people first look at an image, they appreciate the image for what it is. They don't stop and start, I wonder what camera settings he used. I wonder why he chose that composition. Why hasn't he put that on the rule of thirds? I don't want them to go through that thought process. What I'd really like them to go through is look at it and think, wow, that looks interesting, or wow, that creates some reaction in them, that they appreciate it for just being a good image. The third thing, and this also came out of Guy Tarl's book, is I've been immersing myself in black and white photography, so studying a lot of the classic photographers, and in particular, as you can tell from this week's images, Michael Kenna. Now, I didn't want to fall into the trap of being a copycat, just trying to recreate what other famous masters have done before me. As like many of us, you feel like you want to create something that is uniquely yours. But what helped me most this week was understanding that if you want to create something new, you can't really do that unless you know what's gone before you. So studying the masters is a natural thing to do to be able to develop your own voice. And that's what I teach in my mentoring program. It's not the technical side, because you probably know already what aperture and shutter speed and ISO are, but it's finding what moves you, what you actually want to say with your photographic voice, and learning to trust what matters. So if you're at that stage, you're technically capable, but asking yourself, how do I get to the next level? And if you want to create work that feels like art, that makes people go wow when they take a look at it, not just create snapshots, but create really good photographs, then maybe it's time you should book that discovery call and we can have a no strings attached chat for 30 minutes or so. I'll leave a link to that in the description, because let's face it, the dust of everyday life settles on all our souls, and photography might be just how we wash it all off. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.